everybody, this is Miss Huval. This video is for English 2 Honors. It's going to be on the allegory called Terrible Things in Chapter 2 of Night. I'm assuming at this stage of the game that you've read Chapter 2. This is not a summary video, so you're going to be confused if you don't know what happened in Chapter 2. So go read that before you watch this video. It's very brief. I'd also like you to read something called Terrible Things. It's an allegory that I've saved for you on JPAMS in PDF format. It's very brief. If you take a look at this, it's this page and that page, and that's it. But it is something I want to talk about in conjunction with the beginning of night. All right, so pause me, stop here, go read, and come back. Okay guys, I'm assuming that you've read Chapter 2 of Night and that you've read the allegory Terrible Things. I want to start with Terrible Things, which is, as I've said 3 times, an allegory. So an allegory, in case you don't remember, is a literary device, and it's usually a narrative, a story, in which a character, place, or event is used to deliver a broader message about real-world issues or occurrences. And an allegory is distinctive because every character in event in the allegory is symbolic of another character or another event in the real world, okay? So it's a pretty deep metaphorical sort of story, okay? The one that we read, Terrible Things, is about the Holocaust, as I'm sure you figured out. So the terrible things come to the forest, and one by one take the animals away. They start by taking the birds, okay? And they say to the creatures of the forest, hey, we want everybody who's got feathers. And one by one, they all jump up and say, not I don't have feathers. And once the birds leave, they say, oh, those birds were always noisy, and now there's more room in the trees. And they don't really question, they don't really dig deep on why the terrible things wanted the birds. They were just super happy that the terrible things didn't want them. So one by one, the animals in the forest are taken away. After the birds, it's the squirrels. And the same thing happens. Squirrels were greedy. They were always storing away things for themselves. They didn't share. Why did the terrible things take them? Doesn't matter. They didn't take us. We should be thankful for that. Then they come back for the fish. And after that, for the porcupines. And then there was nobody left except for the rabbits. And guess what? The terrible things come back for the rabbits. And at that stage of the game, one little rabbit hides, and he survives, and he wants to go tell someone to beware of the terrible things, but he's afraid no one will listen. And so overall, this allegory is deeply symbolic, as we talked about before. The characters, the places, and the events are all symbols of other characters, places, and events. So the terrible things during the Holocaust, as I'm sure you've surmised, would be the Nazis. And all of the forest creatures are the people who didn't stand up and do anything because it didn't directly impact them. And in the end, it does. And that's one of the big questions we have when we study the Holocaust. How did this happen? How did people let it happen? How did people not know what was going on? And why didn't anyone stop it? So with this allegory, we're kind of looking at that in depth. If you don't stand up and do something, who will? And that's kind of the gist of that allegory. There's a very well-known quote, and it says, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I'm sure you've heard it before. It's been attributed to Martin Luther King Jr., it's been attributed to FDR. I did a little research, and neither of them actually said it. But there's controversy over who actually began began saying something along those lines. But anyway, so all in all, I wanted you to read Terrible Things because of its allegorical connection tonight, particularly to chapter 1 of Night. That whole idea that it can't happen to us. It's not going to happen to us. Yeah, they took Moish the beetle away. They took this guy away. They took that guy away. But it's not going to happen to us. It's going to be fine. Not to say that there's anything that could have impacted the ultimate end, you know. But some people did run, and some people did hide, as you know from reading Anne Frank. Some people did buy the immigration certificates. Some people just took off. So anyway, that's that. All right, so now we're looking at chapter 2 of Night. And in chapter 2 of Night, we are once again focused on setting first. Now, the setting here changes. All right, so at the very end of chapter 1, they've boarded the cattle car and they are off, not knowing where they're going, possibly thinking they're going to a brick factory somewhere in Hungary. And as we know, that's not what happens. So whenever you're looking at setting, you're always looking at time and place. So what is the time frame of chapter 2? How long does chapter 2 actually take? Well, that's not easy to piece together, but I tried for you. So on page 24, when Mrs. Schechter goes nuts on that page, it says that they've been on the train and it's the third night. All right, so we know that the first time Miss Schechter starts to lose her mind is on the third night. On page 26 and 27, day 4 passes and they pull into a station that they see is Auschwitz. And at that stage of the game, they stop. They stay there till about 10 p.m. About 11 p.m., they roll out. They end up in Birkenau. Okay? So the time frame is about 4 days that they're on the train. And if you think of 80 people packed into a train, it said no, you know, a lot of people couldn't sit or lay down or anything at the same time. So you were just jammed in there. And the bathroom was, in effect, a bucket in the corner. And you had to eat whatever it was you brought with you. Remember, everybody had a backpack or a bag with them when they left of their personal belongings that they wanted to bring with them. Okay? So in terms of their location, if you remember the geography of this area, it's Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, kind of going in a semicircle that way. Okay? So they board the train, and when they stop, they're in Czechoslovakia. That happens on page 23. There's a German officer who informs them that they're now under control of the German army and that they're in Czechoslovakia. And at that stage of the game, we know that they're moving north. They know that they're moving north, and they're not going to be staying in Hungary and going to a brick factory at all. Now, Auschwitz is in Poland, which is one country north of Czechoslovakia, so they're moving in that direction. And Auschwitz is actually a compound that has Auschwitz I, Auschwitz II, and Birkenau in it. And so when it says at the very end of chapter 2 that they rolled into Birkenau, they're in this giant compound that involves all 3 of those camps. Some are work camps. Birkenau is a sorting camp. It's a death camp. All right? Okay, so that's it for the setting. Now, we want to look at some themes that are developing. Remember, themes are truths about life that are revealed through a story. And even memoirs, even true stories, can develop themes. And definitely you see a few developing here. Let's talk first about the human's tendency toward optimism in times of trial. We kind of talked about that a little bit with chapter 1 as well. So despite the fact that when they realize they're not in Hungary, Ailey says on page 23, we had fallen into the trap. You know, when they get on that train, packed in like sardines, 80 on a train, and that threat goes out, you're in charge of this car. If anybody escapes, I'm going to kill you. They know that this is not going to be any kind of vacation travel. Then on page 27, they land at Auschwitz. Someone gets off the train car, it stops, they open it up, somebody goes and finds information. They come back, they say, oh, this is a good camp, we're fortunate to be here. It's a work camp. They're good conditions. Families won't be separated. Those who are able will work in the fields, and those who are strong will work in factories. And that's the information that they're given. The optimism soars. I think the actual phrase Ailey uses on page 27 is confidence soared, that things were going to be okay. So you've got people who are unfailingly optimistic and thinking, well, this bad thing happened, but things are going to turn around. And it's not because they're crazy, okay? It's a systematic pattern of misinformation that allows the Germans to control the outcomes by parceling out information bit by bit and piece by piece, flat out lying, making up extensive stories to cover what the truth really is. And that's a big part of their success. That, and as we mentioned a little bit in chapter 1, using the Jews to maintain order and even to enable their own demise in some situations. And their main source of doing this is misinformation. So what are some other examples of Jews being used against themselves? Well, at the very end of the chapter on page 28, as they're disembarking from those cattle cars, they are beaten and told to leave all their belongings behind, the ones that they carefully packed into their bags. They're being left on the train. People jump onto the train car, start hitting them, and these people, as Ailey tells us, are strange-looking creatures. These are people dressed in striped jackets, and so we know that these are inmates. Okay? So this whole idea that you're able to manipulate people into doing your dirty work for you is a big MO of the Nazis, as you'll see in this book. All right, so there are other themes too. The importance of maintaining human dignity in the face of inhuman or degrading circumstances. And you could see that even in chapter 1, when the ghettos were established. They kept order, they kept taking care of each other. Even when they were standing in line and they were dying of thirst, the children were scurrying around trying to get people drinks. They're looking out for each other, and they're not letting people suffer unnecessarily. And that is a key theme that keeps coming up in the book. In this one, we see a lot of attacks on their human dignity. Threats of being shot on the spot. Okay? The threat changes once they get to Czechoslovakia. The German officer tells them, if anyone in this train car escapes, everyone will be shot. Okay? If you don't give up your gold and your jewelry, if you remember the German soldier sent around a Hungarian guy to pick up their jewelry, and if we find that you have any jewelry left, you will be shot on the spot. So this fear tactic, that is an assault, making you feel not like a person, but like the German soldier called them, dogs. You'll be shot like a dog. Okay? The whole idea of being packed into that thing is definitely an assault on your human dignity. 80 people in. We didn't even talk about the bars on the windows and the fact that it is nailed shut On page 23 and 24, they tell us that. Nailed shut and has bars on the windows. So it's very hard to breathe. It's very hard to move about. All right. So we see our human dignity under fire already in chapter 2. And Mrs. Schechter, I guess, might be our most perfect example of this. Now, Mrs. Schechter, at first, when she starts hollering and screaming, the people on the train treat her with respect and kindness. There's someone on page 25 with a damp rag sort of on her face, trying to calm her. They comfort her. They believe that her hallucinations might be caused not by her being crazy, but instead by her being thirsty, maybe dehydrated. They try to give her some water. Her son tries to calm her. He's crying. He's 10 years old. But soon, like a page later, during the same night even, when her screaming, "Beware Jews, I see a fire, I see a fire," when that continues, she's bound and gagged. Then she's struck, and the car erupts with cheers because people are happy that she'll finally shut up. It goes accelerating from there to her receiving blows to the head. So it doesn't take long for people's nerves to become frayed. And it doesn't take long for Mrs. Schechter to go from neighbor. I think Ailey even makes a comment that she had been to their house, that her husband is extremely religious. She earns the money in the family, and that she had eaten often at their house. So Mrs. Schechter is a good example of our human dignity being under fire. How she reacts is one thing, but more importantly, we're looking at how the other people in the cattle car react. Okay? So we're clinging to that as much as we can. All right. The last theme I wanted us to take a look at was the strength of family bonds and the reliance of people on their family to survive, and their family being a motivation to survive. And a great example of that would be in chapter 1, where Ailey does not want his family to be separated. He has an opportunity to go with Maria, their maid, and to hide and not be sent to the brick factory in Hungary. But he doesn't want to be separated from his family, so he doesn't go. It's a great comfort to the Jews when they arrive at Auschwitz and they're given the false information that families will not be separated. So the strength in family is a key theme throughout the book. And you can see it reflected in Mrs. Schechter. On page 24, it tells a little bit of her background information. The reason she's on this cattle car with just her 10-year-old son is because she was separated from her husband and her 2 other sons. And Ailey credits this separation with the fact that she had lost her mind. All right, so we'll see that one develop a lot, especially in chapter 3, which will be my next video for you. All right, the last thing I wanted to talk to you about was motif. Once again, we have fire and night, and they are combined. On page 27 and 28, there is fire coming from a chimney. They arrive at Birkenau in the dark of night, and those 2 key things combine. But previous to that, Miss Schechter is hollering and screaming about a fire, and people near the window look out. They can't see a fire, but she's screaming that it's there. So is she a visionary? Is she hallucinating? We don't know. But when they arrive at Birkenau, they see fire. And the fact that it's nighttime is significant because you can see the flames, whereas in daytime it would be more difficult to pick them out. So if we remember in chapter 1, that the motif of fire, he looked up at the sky, Ailey looked up at the sky, and he said we were becoming part of a giant fire that was going to consume us all. And so it comes back again in chapter 2, that idea of nighttime being the time of fear, the time of realizing what's going on, and then the fire, part of that giant fire that seems to be consuming us all. All right? So that's the end of chapter 2. I hope everybody's doing great. I'll have chapter 3 ready for you as soon as I can. Go ahead and start reading now. Bye.